My name is Sylvia. I am 27 years old, and I still remember the day my world collapsed when I was 14. My little sister Lily was diagnosed with a rare disease, and my parents chose to take her abroad for treatment. They left me behind with my grandmother, promising it would only be temporary. But temporary turned into 9 years of silence. 9 years of wondering why I wasn't worth keeping. Then, out of nowhere, I received a message from them wanting to reconnect. If you are watching this video, please let me know where you are viewing from and hit subscribe to follow along as I share what happened when my parents tried to come back into my life after abandoning me. I grew up in a beautiful suburban home just outside of Chicago. Our two-story brick house had a white picket fence and a tire swing hanging from the oak tree in the front yard. Every detail of my childhood before age 14 felt like something out of a storybook. My father, James, was a successful engineer who designed bridges. He would often bring home miniature models of his projects and let me help assemble them on the dining room table. My mother, Diana, taught third grade at the local elementary school. She had a gentle voice and would read to me every night before bed, doing all the character voices that made me giggle. I was their first child, their pride and joy. Dad would swing me onto his shoulders during our weekend hikes through the forest preserve near our home. Mom would braid my hair each morning before school, humming softly as her fingers worked through my dark brown locks. Every milestone was celebrated with enthusiasm. When I won the spelling bee in fourth grade, they threw a small party with my favorite chocolate cake and rainbow sprinkles. When I broke my arm falling from my bike, they both took time off work to care for me, signing my cast with loving messages and silly drawings. Our family traditions were the foundation of my happiness. Every summer, we would pack the minivan and drive to Lake Michigan for a week of camping. Dad would teach me to fish while Mom collected shells along the shoreline. In winter, we built snowmen in the backyard and made hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Thanksgiving meant helping Mom prepare the turkey while watching the parade on TV. Christmas was magical, with Dad carefully arranging lights on the house and Mom baking gingerbread cookies that filled the home with warmth and spice. When I turned 10, my parents shared exciting news. We were going to have a new family member. I still remember jumping up and down on our living room carpet when they told me I would be a big sister. For months, I helped Mom prepare the nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and arranging stuffed animals in the crib. I would press my ear against her growing belly and talk to my unborn sister, telling her about all the games we would play together. The day Lily was born was one of the happiest of my life. Dad picked me up from school early, his face beaming with excitement as he announced, "Your sister is here." When we arrived at the hospital, Mom was cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. As she placed Lily in my arms for the first time, I promised I would be the best big sister in the world. As Lily grew, I took my role seriously. I would help change her diapers, feed her bottles, and sing lullabies when she was fussy. By the time she was taking her first steps, I was there holding her tiny hands, encouraging her forward. When she spoke her first word, Syl, short for Sylvia, I felt a pride I had never experienced before. Our family of 4 seemed perfect. Mom and Dad talked about taking us on our first trip to Disney World the following summer. I would spend hours telling Lily about meeting Mickey Mouse and riding all the attractions. We would look at brochures together, her little finger pointing at the castle while she squealed with delight. I started 8th grade that fall with so much excitement for the future. My teachers praised my science projects, and I began dreaming of becoming a doctor someday. Dad bought me a medical encyclopedia for my birthday, and I would study anatomy charts in my bedroom, imagining myself in a white coat saving lives. Everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as it should, a perfect childhood leading to a promising future. But life has a way of changing course when you least expect it. The happiness I took for granted was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. The safe, secure world I knew was balanced on a fragile edge, and I had no idea it was about to crumble beneath my feet. The first signs that something was wrong with Lily appeared so gradually that we almost missed them. It started with small things. She seemed more tired than usual, taking longer naps and lacking her usual boundless energy. Her appetite decreased, and Mom had to coax her to eat even her favorite foods. At first, we thought it was just a phase or perhaps a growth spurt. But when Lily began missing developmental milestones that other children her age were achieving, my parents became concerned. She should have been stringing more words together, but her vocabulary remained limited. The pediatrician suggested we give her time, but the worry lines on my mother's forehead deepened. One evening, I came home from soccer practice to find Mom on the phone, her voice hushed and urgent. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out before him, his face tense. They barely acknowledged my presence when I walked in, something that had never happened before. That night, I ate dinner alone while they took Lily to yet another doctor's appointment. This became our new normal. Weekends once filled with family outings were now consumed by medical consultations. The refrigerator door, once covered with my artwork and school awards, gradually became a bulletin board of doctors' business cards and appointment reminders. I started setting my own alarm clock and walking to school alone as Mom was too busy with Lily's morning medications. I remember the day everything changed with absolute clarity. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, the trees outside our house ablaze with autumn colors. I arrived home from school to find both my parents' cars in the driveway, unusual for that time of day. When I entered the living room, Mom was sobbing on the couch, Dad's arm around her shoulders. Lily was napping upstairs, unaware of the storm brewing below. "Sylvia," Dad said, his voice strained in a way I had never heard before. "We need to talk to you about your sister." The doctor had finally given them a diagnosis. Lily had a rare genetic disorder that affected her immune system and neurological development. The medical term was long and complicated, but the implications were devastatingly simple. Without specialized treatment, her condition would progressively worsen. "Is she going to die?" I asked, my voice small in the heavy silence of the room. "No, sweetheart," Mom said quickly, wiping her tears. "But she needs help that is very hard to find." Dad explained that the treatment Lily needed was experimental and only available at a few specialized facilities worldwide. The most promising program was at a research hospital in Switzerland where a team of doctors had been developing targeted therapies for her specific condition. That night, after I went to bed, I could hear them arguing downstairs. Their voices rose and fell like waves crashing against our family's foundation. They were discussing money. The treatment would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, far more than our insurance would cover. Dad mentioned selling the house. Mom cried about using their retirement savings. Neither seemed to remember I was just upstairs listening to our life being dismantled, plan by plan. The next few weeks became a blur of hushed phone calls and tense discussions. Dad took a leave of absence from work to research treatment options and financing possibilities. Mom spent hours on the phone with insurance companies and medical facilities. Lily had more tests, more appointments, and I became increasingly invisible. I tried to help in small ways. I made dinner when Mom was too exhausted. I kept the house clean when the cleaning service was canceled to save money. I even offered my college savings the account they had been building for me since I was born. Dad just patted my head and said, "That's sweet, but it's nowhere near enough." One afternoon, I overheard Dad on the phone mentioning selling everything and starting over. That same evening, a realtor came to evaluate our home. I stood in my bedroom doorway watching strangers assess the only home I had ever known, assigning dollar values to the walls that held my childhood memories. On the last day of school before winter break, no one came to pick me up. I waited in the cold for an hour before walking the 2 miles home, only to find Mom and Dad in a frenzy of activity packing suitcases and boxes. They barely looked up when I entered. "Oh, Sylvia," Mom said, distracted. "I completely forgot. There was an opening with the specialist in Geneva, and we've been trying to arrange flights." It was the first time my mother had ever forgotten me. It wouldn't be the last. The kitchen table had always been the heart of our family, the place where we shared meals and stories, celebrated victories, and consoled defeats. That night, it became the site of my abandonment. Dad sat at the head, Mom to his right, both facing me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Pity, guilt, resignation. Lily was already asleep upstairs, unaware that her life and mine were about to diverge in ways that would leave permanent scars. "Sylvia," Dad began, his voice attempting a strength I could tell he didn't feel. "We need to make some difficult decisions about our family." Mom reached across the table for my hand, but I kept mine firmly in my lap. Something in me already knew what was coming, some primal instinct preparing for the blow. The doctors in Switzerland have agreed to take Lily into their program, he continued. It's her best chance, possibly her only chance, but we need to leave immediately and we need to stay for the duration of the treatment. How long? I asked, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. They exchanged a glance the kind adults share when they're about to lie to a child. We don't know exactly, Mom said softly. At least several months, maybe a year. And I'm going too, right? The question hung in the air, though I already knew the answer. Dad cleared his throat. That's what we need to discuss. The treatment is incredibly expensive, Sylvia. Even with selling the house and using all our savings, we can barely afford it for the three of us. 3, I repeated numbly. You, Mom, and Lily. Your grandmother Margaret has offered to have you stay with her, Mom said quickly, as if rushing through this part would make it less painful. Just until we can get settled and figure things out. Then maybe you can join us. I looked from one parent to the other, searching for any sign that this was a bad joke or a misunderstanding. There was none. Just two adults who had made their choice, and that choice didn't include me. You're leaving me behind, I said, the words tasting bitter. You're choosing Lily over me. It's not like that, Mom protested, tears forming in her eyes. We're not choosing anyone. We're doing what we have to do to save your sister's life. We don't have another option, Dad added firmly. Your grandmother loves you, and her house is close enough that you can stay in the same school with your friends. We'll call every day, have video chats. It will only be for a little while, Sylvia, just until we get Lily stabilized. Just a few months, Mom echoed, reaching for my hand again. This time I let her take it, feeling her familiar warmth for what I somehow knew would be the last time in a very long while. The next morning was a whirlwind of activity. The moving company had already taken most of our furniture the day before. Now Dad was loading the last suitcases into our car, while Mom fussed over Lily, making sure she had her favorite teddy bear and blanket for the journey. I stood in the empty living room, my own suitcase packed for the trip to Grandma Margaret's house. The walls echoed with the absence of family photos that had been carefully wrapped and stored. The hooks remained small holes marking where our life together had been displayed. The goodbye at the airport was brief and awkward. We were at the security checkpoint, the furthest I could go without a boarding pass. Dad hugged me stiffly, patting my back like I was an acquaintance rather than his daughter. Be good for your grandmother, he said. Focus on your studies. We'll call as soon as we land. Mom's hug was longer but distracted, her eyes already moving past me to the security line, calculating the time needed to reach their gate. We love you so much, sweetheart, she whispered. This isn't forever, just a little while. Lily was half asleep in the stroller, exhausted from the early morning rush. I knelt beside her, stroking her soft cheek one last time. Get better, Lily Pad, I said, using my special nickname for her. I'll see you soon. She smiled sleepily, uncomprehending of the magnitude of this moment. My last memory of my sister was this innocent smile, untouched by the knowledge of what her illness would cost us both. I watched them disappear through security, my mother turning once to wave before they rounded the corner. I stood there long after they were gone, rooted to the spot, as travelers rushed past me in both directions, a stationary island in a sea of movement. Grandma Margaret's house was cozy but small, nothing like our spacious suburban home. She had prepared the guest room for me, adding colorful pillows and a desk for schoolwork. She tried her best to make me feel welcome, cooking my favorite meals and giving me space to adjust. The first few weeks, the calls came regularly as promised. Mom would detail Lily's appointments, the doctors they were meeting, the tests being run. Dad would inquire about school, reminding me to keep my grades up. They always ended with the same refrain, just a little longer and we'll have more information. But gradually the calls became shorter and less frequent. There was always a reason. The time difference made it difficult. Lily had a bad day. They were meeting with specialists. Each excuse seemed reasonable on its own, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Video chats dwindled from weekly to monthly. When we did connect, the conversation revolved almost entirely around Lily's treatment. My questions about when they might return or when I might visit were met with vague assurances and subject changes. The doctors are very encouraged by her progress, Dad would say, but we need to stay for the next phase of treatment. We miss you so much, Mom would add. Just be patient a little longer. But patience has its limits, especially for a 14-year-old girl who feels forgotten by the people who should love her most. 6 months turned into a year stretched into 2. My parents' promises of just a little longer began to sound hollow, especially when I saw their social media updates. While they rarely had time to call me, they somehow found time to post photos of their new life in Switzerland. Pictures of Lily in the hospital, yes, but also family outings in the Alps, dinners in quaint European restaurants, a Christmas tree in what appeared to be an apartment, not a hotel room. I remember staring at one photo in particular. It was Lily's 7th birthday. They had taken her to a Swiss chocolate factory for a tour. The three of them smiled at the camera chocolate smeared on Lily's cheeks, Mom and Dad looking more relaxed than I remembered seeing them in the months before they left. What struck me most was not what was in the photo, but what was missing. There was no empty space where I should have been, no acknowledgement of my absence. They looked like a complete family, a family of 3. That night I cried myself to sleep for what felt like the 100th time. Grandma Margaret heard me and came to sit on the edge of my bed, her weathered hand stroking my hair. "They're doing what they think is best," she said softly. "Best for who?" I asked through tears. "Not for me. For Lily," she admitted. "And sometimes when a child is sick, parents can't see beyond that crisis. So I'm just supposed to wait until they remember I exist." Grandma Margaret had no answer for that. The silence between us held the weight of a truth neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I was no longer a priority in my parents' lives. By the 3rd year, the calls had almost completely stopped. Birthday cards arrived with Swiss postmarks containing gift cards and generic messages. "We love you and miss you," they would write without any explanation for their continued absence or silence. No mention of coming home or bringing me over to join them. I learned of major developments in their lives through social media or through Grandma Margaret, who still occasionally spoke with Mom. Dad had found a job with an international engineering firm in Geneva. They had signed a 2-year lease on an apartment. Lily was enrolled in a special international school that could accommodate her medical needs. Each piece of news was another brick in the wall being built between us, another confirmation that their temporary solution had become permanent. They had reconstructed their lives around Lily's illness, and there was no place for me in that new construction. I began to build my own life in response. At first, it was a form of rebellion. If they could forget me, I would forget them too. I threw myself into school, joining every club and activity that would keep me busy and away from Grandma Margaret's empty house. I made new friends who knew nothing about my family situation, creating a version of myself that wasn't defined by abandonment. But as the years passed, what began as rebellion evolved into resilience. I wasn't just filling time anymore. I was building a foundation for my future. My grades were exceptional. Teachers became mentors. School counselors helped me research colleges and scholarships. I started to see a path forward that didn't depend on my parents' return. Grandma Margaret watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and sadness. "You shouldn't have had to grow up so fast," she told me one evening as I completed college applications at the kitchen table. "I'm okay," I assured her, and the surprise was that I meant it. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something I could carry without being crushed by its weight. In my senior year of high school, Mom called with news that should have been momentous. Lily's condition had stabilized. The treatments were working. They were considering options for long-term care that might eventually allow them to return to the United States. "That's great," I said, my voice flat. "I'm happy for Lily." "And for us," Mom added, missing or ignoring my tone. "We could be a family again." I wanted to ask where that family had been for the past 4 years. I wanted to point out that I was now 18, preparing to leave for college, that the daughter they had left behind was no longer waiting for their return. Instead, I just said, "I have to go. I have homework." That night, I looked through old family photos for the first time in years. The smiling girl in those images felt like a stranger, someone who still believed in the permanence of family bonds. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf, choosing instead to focus on the stack of college acceptance letters on my desk. They represented something my parents had inadvertently taught me to value above all else: independence. When my high school graduation came, I scanned the audience during the ceremony, some small childish part of me still hoping to see them there. Grandma Margaret sat alone, clapping loudly as I accepted my diploma and academic honors. My parents sent a congratulatory email the next day, explaining that Lily had an important medical evaluation that made travel impossible. They promised to celebrate when we were reunited, a concept that now seemed as foreign to me as the country where they lived. I accepted a full scholarship to Northwestern University, only an hour's drive from Grandma Margaret's house. While other freshmen experienced homesickness and parental hovering, I moved into my dorm with just my grandmother's help, accustomed to making decisions on my own and navigating life's milestones without parental guidance. The family I had lost was slowly being replaced by one I was creating. My roommate Jessica became the sister Lily had been meant to be. Study groups evolved into deep friendships. Professors took an interest in my work and my future. And in my sophomore year, I met Thomas in a psychology class, a quiet, thoughtful guy whose own complicated family history gave him an understanding of mine that no one else had managed. In all these relationships, I was careful, cautious about getting too close, vigilant against depending too much on anyone. The lesson my parents had taught me was clear: those who are supposed to love you unconditionally can still leave you behind. It was a lesson I carried into every interaction, an invisible barrier between me and genuine connection. But life has a way of teaching new lessons, even when you think you've learned all you need to know about loss and survival. After graduating with honors in psychology, I was determined to help others heal from their own emotional wounds. The irony wasn't lost on me that my own unresolved trauma had led me to this path. My undergraduate research on abandonment and resilience in children had earned me a spot in a prestigious graduate program, where I continued to excel academically while keeping most people at an emotional distance. The exception was Thomas, who had somehow managed to slip past my defenses. Our relationship had deepened during college, his patience matching my caution in a dance of careful attachment that gradually became something I could trust. When he proposed during our graduate school graduation dinner, I said yes without the hesitation I had expected to feel. "You know I'm not great at the whole family thing," I warned him that night as we walked along Lake Michigan, my new ring catching the moonlight. "You're better than you think," he replied, "and we'll build our own version of family, one that works for us." The concept was both terrifying and exhilarating. A family I could help design with boundaries I could help establish felt safer than the one that had discarded me. Grandma Margaret was overjoyed about the engagement, though her health had begun to decline. At 78, her arthritis made it difficult for her to get around the house she had lived in for decades. When she fell in the bathroom one night, I was the one who got the call from the hospital. I rushed to her side, finding her looking small and fragile in the hospital bed, a bruise darkening one side of her face. The doctor spoke to me as her next of kin, explaining that she had suffered a minor stroke before falling. "She'll need care during recovery," he explained. "Is there someone who can stay with her?" "I will," I said without hesitation. It was an easy decision. Grandma Margaret had been there when no one else was. Now it was my turn to be there for her. I called my parents that night using the emergency number they had provided years ago but that I had never used. Dad answered, his voice groggy with sleep given the time difference. "Grandma Margaret is in the hospital," I said, skipping any greeting. "She had a stroke and fell. The doctors say she'll recover, but she needs care." There was a pause, then the muffled sound of him explaining to Mom what had happened. "That's terrible," he finally said. "How serious is it?" "Serious enough that she can't be alone. I'm staying with her, but I thought you should know." Another pause. "We can't really get away right now, Sylvia. Lily has appointments scheduled that took months to arrange." I hadn't expected them to come, hadn't even asked them to, yet their immediate refusal still stung. "I wasn't asking you to come. I was just informing you about your mother-in-law, Dad." "Of course. Keep us updated. We'll help however we can from here." Help however they could from 6,000 miles away. It was a meaningless offer, and we both knew it. The weeks of Grandma Margaret's recovery were exhausting. I took a leave of absence from my clinical internship to care for her, helping her to physical therapy appointments, managing her medications, cooking meals that would tempt her diminished appetite. Thomas came by almost every evening, often bringing dinner and staying to give me a break. One evening, as Thomas and I sat on the porch while Grandma Margaret napped, he asked the question I had been avoiding. "Have you told your parents how serious this is, that the doctors are concerned about her living alone?" I shook my head. What would be the point? "They're not coming back, Thomas. They've made that clear for years." "But this is different. This is her welfare we're talking about." I sighed, looking out at the familiar neighborhood where I had spent my teenage years. "I'll handle it. I always do." The decision about Grandma Margaret's future fell to me alone. The doctors recommended assisted living, but the good facilities had long waiting lists. She could stay with me, but my small apartment wasn't equipped for someone with mobility issues. In the end, we compromised. I found a ground floor apartment near my own and hired part-time care for when I couldn't be there. Through it all, my parents remained distant figures, sending money for medical expenses, but offering little else. Their absence during this crisis was just another confirmation of what I had already accepted. I was on my own, and perhaps had been long before they physically left. 6 months after her stroke, Grandma Margaret had another more severe one. This time there was no recovery. I sat by her hospital bed for 3 days, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Thomas brought me changes of clothes and made sure I ate. Jessica came to sit with me during her lunch breaks. Marcus and Alyssa, friends from graduate school, organized a rotation so I wouldn't be alone during the long night hours. My parents called once during those 3 days. The conversation was brief and awkward, full of platitudes about Margaret's strength and how she would pull through. They didn't offer to come. I didn't ask them to. When Grandma Margaret passed away quietly on the third night, Thomas was with me, his arm around my shoulders as I cried for the woman who had become my true parent in every way that mattered. I handled the funeral arrangements alone, working from the instructions Grandma Margaret had left in her will. The service was small, but filled with people who had genuinely loved her, neighbors who had known her for decades, fellow church members, a few relatives from her side of the family. My parents sent flowers and a card. Their absence was noted by everyone, their excuses about travel difficulties and Lily's health received with tight lips and disapproving glances. I found I didn't have the energy to defend them anymore. After the funeral, I stood in Grandma Margaret's empty house, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of her long life. Thomas found me there, staring at the wall of family photos she had maintained, including many of me from high school and college graduations, events my parents had missed, but that she had faithfully attended. "What will you do with everything?" he asked gently. I looked around at the furniture that had witnessed my transformation from abandoned child to independent adult. "I'll keep some things, sell the rest. The house too, eventually." "And your parents? Will you tell them?" I nodded. "They're her family too, in theory at least. They can have whatever they want if they ever come back to claim it." But they didn't come back, not even to help settle Grandma Margaret's affairs. Instead, they sent more money, as if financial contribution could substitute for physical presence, as if dollars could fill the void left by their absence. I used the proceeds from selling Grandma Margaret's house to establish a scholarship in her name at Northwestern for students who had overcome significant family challenges. It felt like the right way to honor the woman who had given me a home when my own parents wouldn't. 5 years passed. I completed my doctorate in psychology, specializing in childhood trauma and resilience. I opened a small private practice focusing on helping children navigate family disruptions. I moved in with Thomas, and we began planning our wedding. My life had taken shape without my parents in it. The pain of their abandonment had scarred over, becoming a part of my history rather than an active wound. I rarely thought about them anymore, rarely wondered what might have been if Lily hadn't gotten sick, if they hadn't made the choices they did. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 9 years after they had left me behind, an email arrived that would force me to confront everything I thought I had moved past. The notification appeared on my phone during a session with a 12-year-old client whose parents were going through a bitter divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me as I glanced down and saw the sender, James Anderson, my father's name, looking strange and formal in my inbox after so many years of silence. I finished the session professionally, giving my client my full attention, despite the emotional earthquake happening within me. Only after she left did I allow myself to open the email, my hands shaking slightly as I tapped the screen. Dear Sylvia, it began the formality of the greeting, another reminder of the distance between us. I hope this email finds you well. It has been far too long since we've been in proper contact, a fact for which I take full responsibility. I snorted at this understatement. 9 years of near silence reduced to far too long. I'm writing with news that we had hoped to share for many years. Lily's condition has finally reached complete remission. Her doctors have given her a clean bill of health with only routine checkups needed going forward. After much discussion and planning, we have made the decision to return to the United States. My breath caught. They were coming back. After 9 years of building a life without them, they expected to simply re-enter it. We have purchased a house in Evanston, not far from where we understand you are now living. Diana, Lily, and I would very much like to see you when we arrive next month. Lily especially has been asking about her big sister. She remembers you only vaguely, but has seen photos and heard stories. Stories. I wondered what stories they had told her. Did they explain how they had left me behind? Did they justify their choices, paint themselves as tragic heroes making impossible decisions? I know that our relationship has been strained by distance and circumstance. I know that words cannot easily repair what has been broken. But we would like the opportunity to try if you are willing. Please let us know if you would be open to meeting when we arrive. We leave the terms entirely up to you. The email ended with contact information and was signed, "With love, always, Dad." Love, always. As if love were a constant that had existed uninterrupted through 9 years of abandonment. As if love could be claimed without being demonstrated. I stared at the screen until it went dark, then pressed the power button to read it again. The words remained the same, their meaning no less shocking on second reading. My next client would arrive in 15 minutes. I set the phone down and went to the small bathroom attached to my office, splashing cold water on my face. In the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized as the 14-year-old girl who had stood in an airport watching her family walk away. My hair was shorter now, styled professionally. My eyes held confidence instead of uncertainty. The face that looked back at me belonged to Dr. Sylvia Anderson, respected psychologist, not to the abandoned daughter of James and Diana. When Thomas came home that evening, I was sitting on our balcony with a glass of wine watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. "Tough day?" he asked, kissing the top of my head before sitting beside me. I handed him my phone with the email still open. He read in silence, his expression growing more serious with each line. "Wow," he said finally. "That's unexpected." "Is it?" I asked. I always knew they'd come back eventually. Lily was their excuse for leaving. Now she's their excuse for returning. "What are you going to do?" It was the question I had been asking myself all afternoon through 2 more client sessions where I had somehow maintained my professional composure while my personal life tilted on its axis. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it completely. They managed without me for 9 years. I can manage without them forever. Thomas took my hand. "And the other part?" I sighed, looking out at the darkening horizon. "The other part wants answers. Wants to look them in the eye and ask how they could do it. How they could leave their child behind and barely look back. Those aren't mutually exclusive, you know. You can get answers without letting them back into your life." He was right, of course. This wasn't an all-or-nothing proposition. I could set boundaries, protect the life and identity I had built, while still confronting the past that had shaped me. "I need to think about it," I said. For the next week, I did just that. I discussed it in my own therapy session, a practice I had maintained since graduate school. I journaled about it, listing pros and cons with the analytical approach that had helped me navigate life's complexities. I even discussed it with Jessica over lunch, valuing her unfiltered opinion. "I'd tell them to go to hell," she said bluntly, stabbing a fork into her salad. "But that's me. You're more measured." "Professional hazard," I said with a small smile. "I spend all day helping people work through their feelings instead of acting on impulse." "So what does the professional psychologist in you say about this situation?" I considered the question carefully. That unresolved trauma doesn't heal by avoiding it. that confronting the source of pain can be part of the healing process. And what does Sylvia the person say? That I'm scared, I admitted. Scared that seeing them will reopen wounds that have finally scarred over. Scared that I'll revert to being that abandoned 14-year-old girl instead of the woman I've become. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You won't. That girl is part of you, but she's not all of you anymore. You've built something strong, Sylvia. Seeing them won't undo that. In the end, I decided to meet them, but on my terms. I replied to my father's email with a brief message agreeing to a meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, that was public enough to provide emotional safety, but quiet enough for a private conversation. I specified a time limit of 1 hour and made it clear that this meeting did not constitute a commitment to ongoing contact. The day of the meeting arrived with a physical manifestation of my anxiety, a tension headache that started at the base of my skull and radiated upward. I dressed carefully in a professional outfit that made me feel armored, protected. Thomas offered to come with me to wait nearby in case I needed support, but I declined. This was something I needed to face alone. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, securing a table in the corner where I could see the entrance. I ordered a latte and tried to calm my racing heart, reminding myself that I was no longer the vulnerable child they had left behind. I was Dr. Sylvia Anderson. I had built a life, a career, a future. Whatever happened in the next hour couldn't take that away. When they walked through the door, time seemed to compress and expand simultaneously. 9 years vanished in an instant, yet stretched between us like an unbridgeable chasm. My father looked older, gray, touching his temples, lines deepening around his eyes. My mother's hair was shorter than I remembered, styled differently, but her nervous gesture of tucking it behind her ear was achingly familiar. And then there was Lily. No longer the small child of my memories, but a teenager of 15, tall and slender, with features that echoed my own at that age. She hung back slightly behind our parents, her eyes curious as they found mine. For a moment, none of us moved. Then my mother broke the stillness, stepping forward with arms half raised as if to embrace me before stopping herself, uncertainty written across her face. Sylvia, she said my name, sounding strange in her voice after so many years. You look so beautiful. I stood but made no move toward her, maintaining the physical boundary I needed. Hello, Mom, Dad, Lily. My father cleared his throat. Thank you for agreeing to meet us. I gestured to the empty chairs. Please sit down. They settled awkwardly around the table, the silence stretching uncomfortably until the barista called out their order numbers. Dad went to retrieve their drinks, leaving Mom and Lily with me. Your practice is doing well, Mom asked, clearly trying to find safe conversational ground. We've seen your website. It looks very impressive. It is, I confirmed. I have a full client list and a waiting list beyond that. And you're engaged. She glanced at the ring on my finger. Your father mentioned seeing that on your social media. The fact that they had been monitoring my life from afar without participating in it felt invasive rather than caring. Yes to Thomas. We're getting married next spring. Dad returned with their drinks, setting them carefully on the table. Congratulations on your engagement, he said, picking up the thread of conversation. He seems like a good man from what we could tell. I took a sip of my latte, using the moment to compose myself. He is. The best I've ever known. He's been there for me through everything. The emphasis on the last word was subtle but unmistakable. Dad winced slightly. Sylvia, I know we have a lot to explain, a lot to apologize for. 9 years worth. I agreed, my voice steadier than I felt. It wasn't supposed to be that long, Mom interjected. When we left, we genuinely believed it would only be for a few months, maybe a year at most. But Lily's treatment was more complicated than we anticipated, Dad continued. The initial protocol wasn't as effective as the doctors hoped. There were setbacks, new approaches to try. And the financial situation was dire, Mom added. We had spent everything to get there. James had to find work just to keep us afloat. I listened to their explanations, the same ones they had parceled out in diminishing phone calls years ago. They sounded rehearsed, as if they had practiced this conversation, anticipating my questions and preparing justifications. Lily, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. "They never stopped talking about you," she said, her voice soft but clear. "There were pictures of you everywhere in our apartment. Dad would check your social media every day to see how you were doing." I looked at my sister, truly seeing her for the first time. Her eyes, so like my own, held a wisdom beyond her years, the kind that comes from prolonged illness and confronting mortality too young. "I asked about you all the time," she continued. "Why you couldn't come visit, why we couldn't go back. They told me it was complicated, that someday I'd understand." "And do you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Understand?" She considered the question seriously. "I understand they were scared, that they thought they were doing the right thing for me, but I also understand it wasn't fair to you." She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry, Sylvia. I know it doesn't mean much coming from me, but I'm sorry for what happened because of me." "It wasn't because of you," I said firmly, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "You were a child who got sick. You didn't make the decisions that followed." I turned my attention back to my parents. That's the part I've never understood. Not the initial crisis, not the desperate measures to save Lily. I understand all of that. What I don't understand is why, once you were settled, once you had jobs and an apartment and a life there, you didn't try to bring me over. Why the calls stopped. Why you seemed to forget I existed except for occasional birthday cards and Christmas gifts. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't forget you, Sylvia. We thought about you every day." "Thinking isn't the same as acting," I replied. "Thinking doesn't help a teenage girl who's wondering why her parents don't want her anymore." "It was shame," Dad said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise even him. "At first it was the practical reasons, the ones we've explained. But after a while it was shame. The longer we stayed away, the harder it became to face what we had done. Each missed birthday, each milestone we weren't there for, it all compounded until the gulf seemed too wide to cross." It was the first explanation that rang completely true, that wasn't wrapped in justifications about Lily's health or financial constraints. The simple human failing of shame, of avoiding a difficult truth by pretending it didn't exist. "So what changed?" I asked. "Why come back now?" "Lily's health primarily," Dad answered. "Once she was fully in remission, there was no medical reason to stay in Switzerland. But also," he hesitated, glancing at Mom. "Also, we couldn't bear to miss any more of your life," Mom finished. "We've already missed so much. Your college graduation, your doctorate, your engagement. We don't expect you to welcome us back with open arms, Sylvia. We know we don't deserve that. But we hoped that maybe over time we could build something new. Not the same as before, but something." I looked at the three of them, this family that was simultaneously mine and not mine. The parents who had raised me for 14 years and then disappeared for 9. The sister who had been the unwitting catalyst for our family's fracture. "I don't know if that's possible," I said honestly. "I'm not the same person you left behind. I've built a life without you in it. I have people who love me, who have been there when you weren't." "We understand," Dad said, though the pain in his eyes suggested otherwise. "We just ask for a chance on whatever terms you're comfortable with." I thought about the clients I counseled, the advice I gave about forgiveness and healing. How many times had I told someone that forgiveness wasn't about the other person deserving it, but about freeing yourself from the weight of anger? How often had I spoken about the possibility of building new relationships on the ashes of broken ones, with clear boundaries and realistic expectations? "I can't promise anything," I said finally, "but I'm willing to take small steps, very small steps." "That's all we ask," Mom said, hope lighting her features for the first time since they had arrived. "I'd like to get to know you," Lily added. "The real you, not just stories and pictures." I looked at my sister, seeing in her a potential relationship that had been stolen from both of us. "I'd like that too, Lily. Maybe we could start with lunch sometime, just the two of us." She smiled, a genuine smile that reminded me of the toddler I had once read bedtime stories to. "I'd really like that." As our hour drew to a close, Dad hesitantly mentioned that they were planning a small housewarming gathering the following month. Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors and colleagues. We'd be honored if you would come. You and Thomas, of course. I considered the invitation, weighing it against my need for emotional safety. I'll think about it, I promised, which was more than I had expected to offer when I walked into the coffee shop. We stood to leave the awkward question of physical contact hanging in the air between us. Mom solved it by simply reaching out and squeezing my hand, a gesture that managed to convey affection without violating the boundaries I had established. "Thank you for meeting us, Sylvia," she said. "It means more than you know." As they walked away, Lily turned back once, giving a small wave that reminded me so much of the little girl I had known that my chest tightened with a complex mixture of emotions: loss for what might have been, cautious hope for what might still be possible. The journey of healing is rarely linear. In the months that followed our coffee shop meeting, there were steps forward and steps back in my relationship with my parents and Lily. I did attend their housewarming with Thomas by my side, offering steady support. The evening was tense at times, but ultimately productive, a careful first step into each other's lives. Lily and I developed our own relationship separate from our parents. We met for lunch every few weeks, gradually getting to know each other as the people we had become rather than the children we had been. She was thoughtful and perceptive, with an old soul shaped by her years of illness. She asked questions about my life during our years apart, listening with genuine interest to stories about Grandma Margaret College and how I met Thomas. "I used to imagine what you were doing," she confessed during one of our lunches. "I'd make up stories about your adventures and friends. In my head, you were always doing something amazing." The reality was less glamorous, I told her. "A lot of studying, a lot of figuring things out on my own." "But you did it," she said with admiration. "You built this whole life without them, without me. That's pretty amazing, Sylvia." With my parents, progress was slower, more measured. I agreed to family therapy, a condition I set for continuing our relationship. It felt strange to sit on the other side of the therapeutic process, to be the client rather than the doctor. But it provided a structured, safe environment to address the abandonment that had shaped the last 9 years of my life. In those sessions, difficult truths emerged. Mom admitted that in the depths of the crisis with Lily, she had emotionally shut down, focusing solely on the child who seemed in immediate danger, while convincing herself that I was old enough, strong enough to manage without her. Dad confessed that the longer they stayed away, the more he told himself that I was better off without parents who had failed so completely. "I watched your successes from afar," he said during one particularly raw session. "Your academic achievements, your career trajectory. I told myself you had flourished without us, that our absence had somehow made you stronger. It was a way to alleviate my guilt, to pretend that abandoning you had somehow been good for you." "It wasn't," I said plainly. "I achieved those things despite your absence, not because of it. I would have given anything to have had my parents at my high school graduation, to have had someone besides Grandma Margaret to call when I got into Northwestern, to have had family support when she died." These conversations were painful but necessary, peeling back layers of justification and self-deception to reach the core truths we all needed to acknowledge before moving forward. As my wedding approached, the question of their role in the ceremony became unavoidable. Thomas, ever understanding, told me the decision was entirely mine. "It's our day," he said. "Whoever you want or don't want, there is your choice. I'll support whatever you decide." After much reflection, I invited them to attend, but not as traditional parents of the bride. They sat in the front row alongside Thomas's family witnesses rather than participants. It was Alyssa, my dear friend who had stood by me through the darkest days after Grandma Margaret's death, who walked me down the aisle. Jessica served as my maid of honor, the sister of my heart, if not my blood. The reception presented its own challenges. There were awkward moments when friends who knew my history encountered my parents for the first time, curiosity and judgment mingling in their expressions. But there were also moments of unexpected grace, like when I saw Lily dancing with Thomas's younger brother, laughing like the carefree teenager she had never had the chance to be during her illness. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around us, my father approached me at a quiet moment. "You've created something beautiful here," he said, gesturing to the friends and chosen family surrounding us. "A life full of love and connection. I want you to know how proud I am of you, Sylvia. not just for your accomplishments, impressive as they are, but for the person you've become. You are kind and resilient in ways that humble me. I studied him, this man who had once been the center of my world, and then a painful absence in it. Thank you, I said simply. I know we can never make up for the years we lost, he continued, and I know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you know that we do love you, always have, even when we failed to show it. The younger me would have craved these words, would have accepted them as healing balm for wounds still fresh and bleeding. The woman I had become recognized them for what they were, a truth that came too late to change the past, but might still influence the future. I believe that you believe that, I said carefully, and I'm working on accepting it. But love isn't just a feeling, Dad. It's a series of choices, of actions. For 9 years, your choices didn't include me. He nodded, accepting this hard truth without defense. And now, do your choices include us? It was the question at the heart of everything, the one I had been wrestling with since that first coffee shop meeting. Did I want my parents in my life moving forward? Could I find a place for them that acknowledged our history without being defined by it? I'm trying, I answered honestly. I can't promise what that will look like or how it will feel, but I'm trying. He seemed to understand that this was the most I could offer, a willingness to keep the door open without guarantees about what might pass through it. In the years since that conversation, we have continued to build a new kind of relationship, one based not on the traditional bonds of parent and child, but on the more complex connection between adults with a shared but fractured history. We will never recapture what was lost during those 9 years. The formative experiences that should have been shared, the trust that should have been unshakable, the security that should have been my birthright. But we have found ways to be in each other's lives that respect both our shared past and our separate journeys. They have become not the parents who raised me, but people connected to me by blood and history, with whom I choose to maintain a careful relationship. Lily has become a true sister, our bond growing stronger as we both mature, no longer separated by illness and absence. The abandonment that once defined me has become just one chapter in a longer story, a difficult passage that shaped me but does not confine me. The walls I built for protection have slowly transformed into boundaries I maintain by choice, allowing me to engage with my family of origin while preserving the self I fought so hard to create. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about forgetting or even fully reconciling. Sometimes it's about finding a way forward that honors your own healing while acknowledging the humanity, flawed and fragile, of those who hurt you. It's about recognizing that people can be both the source of your deepest wounds and worthy of compassion, that relationships can be simultaneously broken beyond repair and capable of evolving into something new. If you have experienced abandonment or betrayal by those who should have protected you, know that your path forward belongs to you alone. There is no right way to heal, no perfect resolution that erases the past. But there is the possibility of building a life rich with meaning and connection, of finding strength in your own resilience, of creating family in its many forms with those who choose to stay. What would you do if someone who abandoned you suddenly wanted back in your life? Would you close the door or leave it open a crack? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and resilience. And remember, sometimes the family we create matters more than the one we were born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find peace on your own path to healing.